This rich bitch who ran, who never served, who was a giant coward, who doesn't know which ankle had the bone spurs, has the temerity to go after a veteran who served for over 2 decades and has the medals to show for it. It's disgusting.
The Young Turks, Cenk Uygur and Will Chamberlain, a right-wing commentator, did a lengthy debate about Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate nominee, on the show Counterpoints with Ryan and Emily. This was a lengthy debate, as I said, about half an hour long. If you want to watch the whole thing, you can go to the Breaking Points website. It's on there. I've picked out a couple of clips here that I thought were interesting, in which they get into some various topics. Cenk Uygur and Will Chamberlain talking about Tim Walz. Let's check it out.
I think like Tim Walz is just goofy. that's another thing about him. He's a really, I mean, think about Tim Walz. Here's the other thing. The guy made a sex joke in his like announcement as VP, referencing this couch stuff. It'd be one thing if he was just doing that on some podcast. He's doing it on the speech where he's making himself known, and then he shakes his wife's hand. I don't know if I shake my wife's hand, I get slapped. The guy's ridiculous. And then I think also on this economic stuff, I mean, Minnesota is an economic basket case. It's actually, relative to other states, it's gotten far worse in the past few years. People are fleeing the state to Florida. He's not actually done a good job of managing his state. And then the state's also become a high crime state because he's so inept on crime, as demonstrated in Minneapolis in 2020.
Okay, it's the fifth best state for business. So this whole thing of extreme liberal is absurd. It's the third happiest state. And then I love every point about Tim Walz. It's as if they're talking about Donald Trump and don't realize it. That guy's really strange, says weird things. Can you believe he said inappropriate things? Really? A guy supporting Trump is going to tell us about how the other guy said inappropriate things, a vague joke about a couch? That's what but you're not outraged that Trump was like, yeah, I grabbed him by the genitals. You don't think that's weird? That's totally normal. And then, oh my God, I can't believe he shook his wife's hand. Well, that's better than Trump. Melania won't even touch his hand. So, I mean, everything you say about Tim Walz is like on steroids, comically true of Donald Trump.
The sex joke thing, Donald Trump, the sex joke thing that Will Chamberlain is thinking is inappropriate because it was at a rally. Donald Trump talked about the size of his manhood in a Republican debate in 2016, talking to little Marco Rubio. I mean, that was one of the really early indications that people saw of like, wow, this is going to be a really, really different presidential campaign. So that's kind of a weird take by Will Chamberlain.
I mean, context seems pretty obviously different, what you say in private versus what you say at a rally. I mean, who makes sex jokes at a rally?
Friends, oh yeah, I sexually assault people. That sounds great. Yeah, in private's way better.
Can we stick on the question of Walz's economic record, actually? Because, Cenk, can you flesh out that point about, this is something I've started to see coming from people actually within Minnesota who have said, Walz did pass these economic populist policies, but what he did with the money and the budget and all of that, is conservatives in Minnesota, unsurprisingly, will hammer Walz for having been bad on the economy. Your contention is that actually it's a benefit for him that he has, the economy that he's overseen in Minneapolis or in Minnesota is a benefit for him on the campaign trail.
Yeah. So look, first, I should also acknowledge that the sexual assault that Donald Trump was convicted of was in public. He actually assaulted her in public. What? He did. In a dressing room.
None of what you said is true. He was not convicted of a sexual assault. That is false.
A jury said he definitely did it, and it was in public.
It was a civil suit. It's not a conviction.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a civil suit where the jury said he definitely did sexual assault in public. Okay. So now to the economic issues. So look, he passes all these wonderful laws that help Americans. Like, look at paid family leave. That's Democrats saying, hey, moms should get, in that case, 20 weeks off after they have a baby so they could bond with the baby. And Republicans go, no, that would hurt corporate interests. Corporations want you to go back to work the next day. And so they all voted no. And they said, well, if you vote to have moms spend any time with their babies, and you know how much Republicans hate babies, and if you do that, my God, it's going to sink the economy. Except it didn't. It's the fifth best state for business. So not only did the average Minnesotan get a lot better situation, but you guys were all wrong. It didn't hurt business at all. So it's always been a mirage. It's the Republican Party is built to serve the rich and serve corporations. So they don't want you to have one day with your baby at all. They don't want you sick leave. They don't want anything. They don't want child tax credit. They don't want any of that stuff because it would hurt their beloved corporations, they think, in their infinite greed. But it turns out it doesn't even hurt them. It still makes business perfectly happy. So he found a way to balance interests in a way that helped everyone. You can't argue with that.
And Cenk Uygur is absolutely right about this with the paid family leave and all of that. The right-wingers in the Republican Party love to talk about family and children and babies and all of this. They love the babies, before they're born, but after they're born, then they don't want to do anything that's actually going to benefit those families or those children. Free school lunches, free college, paid family leave, any of that. They're against all of it. And so Cenk Uygur is exactly right about that. And one thing also I wanted to say, going back to what Will Chamberlain said about the people in Minnesota fleeing to Florida. I don't live in the Midwest. I don't live in Minnesota, so I don't know exactly what's going on there, if that's true, that people are leaving in droves to go to Florida. But one thing that I would, just as an outsider, would say, the weather's a whole lot better in Florida than in Minnesota. I mean, they have really harsh winters there. It's really hot in Florida, but if you're somebody that doesn't like winter, I mean, I don't know that I could I live on the East Coast, but I don't know that I could live in Minnesota and deal with those winters.
Republicans are going to have two problems in going after Walz. And one is that, like you said, Walz seems like a pretty boring white guy, so painting him as a radical is going to be difficult. And Minnesota is Minnesota. And so painting it as Stephen Miller tried as like the next Mogadishu is going to be difficult, and like portraying it as some like communist mecca is also going to be difficult because it's Minnesota. But maybe I'm wrong here. Like, what is your sense of how you guys are going to be able to turn Minnesota and Tim Walz into kind of scary figures?
We're just going to keep publishing the images and videos of Minneapolis in June 2020 over and over and over again. That's what we're going to do.
I feel like
the thumbs. I mean,
I think you're probably. I appreciate that. I suspect you will. I think that people are over that. Like that you're going to look like you're complaining about something that people are kind of ready to move past and are going to say, look, the protests were well-meaning. They were targeting a genuine injustice. They went overboard at times. We don't necessarily want to be reminded of that. Why are you guys reminding us? Maybe do you see my point? Like, I don't know if this is going to work for you.
But I think that the sort of people who are swing voters in this election, I mean, you look at generally, like, what do swing voters care about? What are the Republicans' strongest issues with swing voters? Immigration, crime, inflation, right? Those three. Those are the ones. And crime is a big one. Like the defund the police stuff that Kamala has said in the past, abolish ICE stuff, that's all stuff that she's extremely worried about. That's why she spent like a whole week having her flacks go out there and claim that she wasn't the border czar. So like they're worried about this stuff. Tim Walz makes it much worse for them. This is where Josh Shapiro would have been a really much stronger candidate, more moderate, better on crime. But Tim Walz is just, it fits into the narrative because one of Kamala's weakest points is that she promoted that bail fund in Minneapolis. And Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota who twiddled his thumbs.
And why, Cenk, is that not a huge problem for Walz, in your opinion?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. Number one, this is the same thing Democrats did about January 6th. They beat it into the ground, and they showed the video after video after video until people got bored of it. So I'm kind of known for being honest about our side and the weaknesses in our side. And I don't think that was great political strategy. And right now, Republicans are making that same mistake. I think Ryan's exactly right. People get it. Hey, listen, George Floyd was one of the greatest injustices. I don't know. Maybe Republicans changed their minds and they think, maybe he had it coming or something. I don't know. Maybe they're going to defend Chauvin like they defended Kyle Rittenhouse and George Zimmerman. But in terms of the riots, he did call out the National Guard. They're saying, he didn't do it fast enough. But again, if your candidate is Donald Trump and he refused to call out the National Guard on January 6th, and he sat around and enjoyed it while his own supporters chanted, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence, and he said he didn't mind, I don't think you get to make the case that, oh my God, there'll be chaos if the other guys are elected. So I just don't think that that's a winning issue for them. I think it feels old and stale, but they could run it. And when they do, again, it'll feel a little bit racial. And so I think that they can't help themselves. They keep attacking on race, on the fact that Kamala Harris is a woman. On Tim Walz, I mean, they got nothing because of what Ryan pointed out. It's Minnesota. He's a lovable old grandpa. He passed laws that the people of Minnesota are thrilled with. And so they're going to go to weird. But that's what he said about you guys. And everybody thinks that's true. So it just seems super weak. I don't think they have any case at all. Look, guys, just real quick on this, when Joe Biden was in the race, I said he had a 0% chance of winning. So it's not like I'm telling you, oh, yeah, rah, Democratic Party, they're so great. Now I think they're the clear favorites because his record in Minnesota is excellent. Kamala Harris has been terrific on the campaign trail. And now Donald Trump looks like the stale, old, tired guy who's still raving like a lunatic in the corner. I think they're in a world of hurt.
I think Cenk Uygur is right here, and I disagree with Will Chamberlain about the BLM protests and riots. Like Cenk Uygur says, and Ryan Grimm also, I think people are kind of over it. And also, it wasn't like those only happened in Minneapolis and Minnesota. They happened, there were protests all over the country. So people could say, oh, yeah, there was a protest in my city or in my state or whatever that it maybe even got out of hand. So are they going to blame Tim Walz for what happened all over the country? No. The Democrats can point to, when the Republicans use, these images of the protests and the riots and everything, the Republicans the Democrats can point to Donald Trump having peaceful protesters tear gassed so that he could do a photo op holding up a Bible upside down. Everybody saw that idiotic image of Trump, pretending to be a Christian for all the evangelicals holding that Bible upside down. So I think Cenk Uygur is right and Will Chamberlain is wrong. This isn't it's not going to be a winning take for Republicans.
So Ryan made a point earlier in the show that about this exchange Stephen Miller had with someone about it was someone posting a picture of Tim Walz with his hunting gear on, like bird hunting, something like that, and said, how are you going to paint this guy as like a San Francisco liberal or a coastal elite or something? And Stephen Miller replied, he put tampons in girls' bathrooms, or in boys' bathrooms, I'm sorry, and the exchange went super viral. So Ryan was making the point that it backfires on Republicans because then they look like the middle-aged men who are obsessing over tampons or like forcing you to think.
It's also been debunked. He did not put tampons in boys' restrooms in Minnesota.
About tampons. What's your response to that? Because to me, I actually think the Stephen Miller point is a pretty successful at undercutting the Dem argument that this is just your average, rural Minnesotan dad. But on the other hand, I do see Ryan's point.
I think the politics of that issue in particular have changed over the last 8 years, and that the general public is a lot less sympathetic to, especially when it comes to stuff about trans and kids. So I don't think it helps Tim Walz that he was like making his state a refuge for puberty blockers for children. I think that it's going to actually look bad for him. But more broadly, I think it's like generally it's just this hick-lib stuff where it's like, oh look, it's a liberal with a gun. That's going to persuade conservatives that he's just a fine guy. I mean, we've got so many obvious attacks. I mean, obviously the deployment dodger one is the biggest one. The guy's not going to have credibility among veterans. Every veteran's going to look at him and be like, you would have abandoned me when I was about to deploy. That's what they're going to look at him and say.
That's sick. That's really sick.
Cenk, I mean,
it's just true.
It's sick. You guys do it every time to actual veterans. It's an immoral line of attack. You did it to John Kerry after he took bullets for this country. Your guys are all chicken hawks. They're all loser cowards like Donald Trump, who ran from Vietnam, Dick Cheney, who never served, Tom DeLay, who said, oh, black people took my spot. Otherwise, I would have gone to Vietnam. They never served. They're always cowards. They always send other people to die. They're always rich people going, hey, why don't you poor middle-class people die for the wars that I start? And
except J.D. Vance.
27 years.
Yeah, J.D. Vance went to Iraq. What did Tim Walz do?
Okay, why don't you go serve for 27 years, then I'll judge you. I'll judge. Oh, you should have just stayed 28th year. I'm judging you.
So, Cenk, the knock on him that you're going to hear from the right is that it was May 16th, 2005, I guess, when Walz stepped aside, and as he retired. So this was after 20 plus years in the National Guard, but as he retired, his unit was about to deploy, and according to people in the unit, he had told those in the unit that he would deploy with them to Iraq. So that's going to be the hit. You think it doesn't land because they went after John Kerry, so they'll go after everybody, so they've lost.
And Cenk, let me add also that Chris LaCivita is the head of the Trump campaign with Susie Wiles right now. He is the architect of the Swift boat ad campaign.
Of course, that's why he does this. He does this to every veteran who's served. Oh, you want to serve America? We're going to find a way to smear you. And we're going to pretend that you didn't get shot enough. We're going to pretend that you didn't serve long enough, even though our guys never served and you served over 2 decades. But we're going to find a way to use that against you. So, hey, listen, if you're an average American and you like politics and you care about this country and you want to fix it, be careful. If you go into the armed services, the Republicans will viciously smear you later. Oh, he took a bathroom break once. I didn't like him. He once did something I didn't like in training in the Army or in the National Guard. Okay, where was your guy? No, he didn't have a unit to deploy because his dad literally bribed a doctor to write a doctor's note about a bone spur he didn't have. So, Will, can you explain? Just, I'm being serious because you're smearing a guy who served for decades. So I want you to answer to me why Donald Trump isn't a gigantic coward from running from Vietnam. Don't tell me about an assassination attempt, okay? That's a different thing, and I gave him credit for that. Tell me about why he ran from Vietnam and let poor and middle-class Americans die for him while he bragged about going to orgies instead.
I don't know the details of what exactly went on with this Vietnam stuff, but I will say this is the obvious comparison. He was 22 when Vietnam was going on. Tim Walz was a grown man and the leader of his unit, and he abandoned them.
So since he was a spoiled little brat, and his daddy had given him $400 million and he was 22 and he wanted to get laid, he let other people die for him. That seems like a really compelling argument. You guys seem super brave and really into veterans.
I mean, Tim Walz did exactly that. He could have gone with his unit. 3 of his unit died. These were the men he was leading and told he would deploy with them. And then he left.
50,000 died in Vietnam. None of them were billionaires' kids, that's for sure. None of them were rich kids like Donald Trump who all dodged. And when you dodge a draft like that, what you say is, I don't mind if a kid from Minnesota or Nebraska dies on my behalf. I got orgies to go to. You know what Donald Trump did with veterans who were homeless in front of Trump Tower? He had them removed. He thought that they lowered his property values because those veterans went to Vietnam. Oh, I guess they were traumatized because daddy didn't get them out. So here, get them off of in front of my Trump Tower. This rich bitch who ran, who never served, who was a giant coward, who doesn't know which ankle had the bone spurs, has a temerity to go after a veteran who served for over 2 decades and has the medals to show for it. It's disgusting.
Okay, so what do you think? Who won this section of this debate? Cenk Uygur, do you think his points were valid on Tim Walz? Do you more side with Will Chamberlain and his views against Tim Walz and why he's a bad candidate and going to hurt the Democratic Party's chances of winning the election? Let me know what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. That helps me to grow the channel. Leave me comments about this debate between Will Chamberlain and Cenk Uygur about Tim Walz. I will see you in the next video.